The Galactic Empire had dominated the Orion Arm for 3,000 years. Their military fleets numbered in the millions, vast armadas of warships that blotted out suns when they assembled. Their territory sprawled across 47 star systems, encompassing over 100 inhabited worlds. Their word wasn't merely respected, it was absolute law. Civilizations rose and fell at their command. Entire species had been reduced to servitude or exterminated for the simple crime of resistance. When their long-range scouts finally discovered Earth, a primitive planet whose inhabitants had only recently achieved basic interstellar capability, the Galactics expected what they always expected: immediate, unconditional submission. They were about to learn that expectations and reality don't always align. Ambassador Marcus Thompson stood alone in the cavernous UN Security Council chamber, his hands trembling slightly as he held a crystalline data tablet. The device had arrived via quantum courier just 3 hours earlier, materializing in Earth's orbital station without warning or permission, a casual display of technological superiority that was clearly intentional. The message contained within was brief, translated into flawless English by the Galactic's translation matrix. Thompson had read it 17 times, and each reading made his blood run colder. Surrender your world within 30 solar rotations or face systematic extermination. We are the Galactics. Resistance is extinction. No greeting. No diplomatic preamble. No negotiation. Just a threat delivered with the casual indifference of a landlord serving an eviction notice. The chamber erupted into chaos the moment Thompson finished reading the message aloud. Delegates leaped to their feet, shouting over each other in a cacophony of languages. Some demanded immediate negotiation, their voices shrill with barely concealed panic. Others called for military mobilization, for defiance, for preparation. A few simply sat in stunned silence, faces pale, trying to process the reality that humanity's first major contact with an interstellar empire had come in the form of a death sentence. But Thompson noticed something the others had missed in their panic. He noticed the arrogance that dripped from every single word of that message, the contempt that radiated from its brevity, the sheer, dismissive certainty that Earth would simply roll over and surrender. The Galactics hadn't even bothered to send a proper diplomatic envoy. They'd sent an ultimatum the way one might send a spam message, carelessly, contemptuously, without the slightest expectation of meaningful resistance. That arrogance, Thompson thought, might be their first mistake. President Jennifer Morrison finally restored order by slamming her hand against the podium so hard that the microphone crackled with feedback. The sharp sound cut through the chaos like a knife. "Enough," she commanded, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had led a superpower through 3 separate crises. "We have 30 days to formulate a response. Panic accomplishes nothing. General Richards, what are our military options? Give me facts, not fears." General Robert Richards stood, his weathered face grim but composed. He activated the holographic display embedded in the conference table. 3-dimensional projections of ship designs and weapon systems materialized in the air. "Madam President," he began, his tone measured and professional, "we've been reverse engineering alien technology from the first contact incident 18 months ago. The wreckage from that crashed vessel has provided invaluable insights. We're not as outgunned as they believe us to be." He expanded several technical schematics with a gesture. "Our existing nuclear arsenal, combined with the new plasma cannon prototypes we developed, could inflict significant damage on any invasion force. Our defensive satellite network is more sophisticated than they likely anticipate. And our pilots." He paused, allowing himself a thin smile. "Our pilots are trained in atmospheric combat conditions they've probably never encountered." "But," Morrison prompted, sensing the unspoken caveat. Richard's expression darkened. "But in a prolonged war of attrition against an empire that controls 47 star systems? Against millions of ships?" He shook his head slowly. "We'd be outproduced, outmaneuvered, and eventually overwhelmed. We might last months, maybe a year if we're extremely fortunate and strategic. But unless we can fundamentally change the terms of engagement." He let the sentence trail off. The implication hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Dr. Michael Foster, the Secretary of State, a career diplomat known for his ability to find common ground in impossible situations, cleared his throat nervously. "What about their ambassadors?" he asked. "The three Caldrex representatives who landed last week claiming diplomatic immunity under Galactic Convention Article 7? Surely we can leverage them somehow? Open a dialogue." Thompson's eyes narrowed at the mention of those ambassadors. His jaw clenched involuntarily. Those three Caldrex diplomats had been insufferably condescending from the moment they'd set foot on Earth. They toured humanity's greatest capitals, New York, Beijing, London, Cairo, Tokyo, and laughed openly at human achievements. They'd stood before the Sistine Chapel and called it primitive finger-painting. They'd visited the Louvre and mocked humanity's artistic traditions as childish scribbles. They'd observed military demonstrations and smirked at Earth's technology as though watching children play with wooden swords. Most insultingly, they'd made it abundantly clear through word and gesture that they viewed humanity as nothing more than an amusing curiosity, a species to be studied briefly before the inevitable conquest. Pets to be catalogued before they were either enslaved or exterminated. "They're still at the diplomatic compound in Geneva," Thompson replied, his voice carefully neutral despite the anger simmering beneath. "Technically still under our protection, as per the galactic law they insisted we honor." Morrison leaned back in her chair, her expression shifting from concern to something colder, sharper, more calculating. "Galactic law?" she repeated, her tone dripping with irony. "The same law that apparently allows them to threaten genocide against an entire species without consequence. The same law that permits ultimatums, but not self-defense." The room fell into an uncomfortable silence. Several delegates shifted uneasily, recognizing that tone in their president's voice. It was the same tone she'd used before ordering the targeted elimination of 3 separate terrorist organizations. It was the voice of someone who had just finished calculating costs and decided the price was acceptable. Morrison's gaze swept across the assembled representatives, making eye contact with each in turn. "I want everything," she stated, her voice quiet but absolutely firm. "Everything we know about Caldrex culture, customs, taboos, military doctrine, historical conflicts, social structure, religious beliefs if they have them, psychological profiles, everything. I want to know what makes them tick, what they fear, what they respect, what insults them, what their warriors consider honorable, and what they consider cowardice." She stood, signaling the meeting was approaching conclusion. "We have 30 days, but I want viable options on my desk in 48 hours. Use every resource we have. CIA, MI6, Mossad, every intelligence agency on the planet. Hack their systems if you can. Analyze every interaction we've had with those ambassadors. Study their body language, their speech patterns, everything." She paused at the door, turning back one final time. "And someone get me a detailed profile on Emperor Valdrich himself. If we're going to respond to this threat, I want to know exactly who we're dealing with." 47 hours later, 1 hour ahead of schedule, Ambassador Thompson returned to the Security Council chamber with 3 thick folders and a determined expression. He'd barely slept. His eyes were bloodshot, his usually immaculate suit was wrinkled, and he'd consumed enough coffee to kill a lesser man. But what he'd discovered had been worth every sleepless minute. "Madam President, distinguished delegates," he began, setting up his presentation with hands that were now steady with certainty rather than shaking with fear. "I've compiled everything we could gather about Caldrex culture, and I believe I've identified their fundamental weakness, or rather, their fundamental misunderstanding about us." The holographic display activated, showing images of Caldrex society, their home world, their military structures. "The Caldrex are apex predators," Thompson explained, pulling up biological scans. "Their evolutionary history shows they evolved at the top of their food chain for millions of years. No natural predators. No serious competitors. They didn't have to cooperate to survive, they had to dominate." He changed the image to show their social structures. "Their entire civilization is built on displays of dominance. Strength is the only currency that truly matters in their society. Political power comes from military might. Economic influence comes from the ability to take resources by force. Even their family structures are based on hierarchical dominance. The strongest parent leads, weaker siblings serve stronger ones. Dr. Foster frowned. So, they're basically social Darwinists taken to the logical extreme? Precisely, Thompson confirmed. They respect only power. They view mercy as weakness, compromise as cowardice, and diplomatic niceties as merely tools to identify which species are worth conquering quickly and which can be eliminated slowly for sport. General Richards leaned forward, his strategic mind already working. So this ultimatum is a test, Thompson interrupted, nodding. This threat is specifically designed to provoke a weak response. They're expecting begging, frantic negotiation, or immediate submission. Any of those responses confirms we're prey. Confirms we're weak. Confirms we deserve to be conquered. President Morrison studied the cultural analysis carefully, her expression unreadable. So what do we do? She asked quietly. How do we pass their test? Thompson met her gaze directly, and something fierce burned in his eyes. Something that reminded everyone present that humans, too, were apex predators. That humans had clawed their way to the top of Earth's food chain through intelligence, cooperation, and, when necessary, shocking brutality. We remind them, Thompson said slowly, deliberately, that humans are also apex predators, Madam President. And we've been perfecting it far longer than they have. Morrison stared at the intelligence reports for a long, silent moment. The chamber held its collective breath. Finally, she looked up at General Richards, and her expression had transformed into something that made even hardened military officers feel a chill. The ambassadors, she stated, not asked. They came here under false diplomatic pretenses. They weren't sent to negotiate, they were sent to assess our defenses, our psychology, our weakness. That makes them forward reconnaissance for an invasion force, which, legally speaking, makes them enemy combatants operating on our soil. General Richards understood immediately. A slow, grim smile spread across his face, the smile of a career soldier who'd just been given permission to solve a problem in the most direct way possible. Yes, ma'am, he replied. It does indeed. Morrison's next words were spoken softly, but they carried across the chamber with absolute clarity. Then handle it, and make absolutely certain that the Galactic Empire understands exactly who they're dealing with. 24 hours later, a human vessel emerged from quantum space above Caldros Prime, the throne world of the Galactic Empire. It was a small ship, barely the size of a frigate, utterly insignificant compared to the massive Galactic dreadnoughts that dominated the orbital defense grid. The Galactic traffic controllers initially dismissed it as a minor merchant vessel, perhaps a fool come to petition the Emperor for mercy. Then it broadcast a message on all frequencies, every communication channel, every military band, every civilian network. The message overrode emergency broadcasts, entertainment feeds, government communications, everything. The voice was human, speaking perfect Galactic with an accent that suggested extensive training. This is Commander David Patterson of the United Earth Navy. We received your message. We have prepared our response. Please accept our reply with the sincerity with which it is offered. 3 objects jettisoned from the ship's cargo bay, drifting toward the planet on pre-calculated trajectories that spoke of meticulous planning. The Galactic defense fleet scrambled immediately, but by the time their interceptors had launched, the human ship had already jumped back into quantum space, vanishing as suddenly as it had appeared. The 3 objects continued their descent, protected by ablative shielding that allowed them to survive atmospheric entry. They landed with precision in the Grand Plaza of the Imperial Palace, directly in front of the Emperor's throne room, witnessed by 10,000 Galactic citizens and the Emperor himself. They were cryogenic containers, perfectly preserved, their surface etched with human insignia. Inside were the heads of the 3 Galactic ambassadors. Pinned to each container was a note, written in flawless Galactic script, using formal military terminology. You sent threats. We send replies. Come to Earth if you're brave enough to collect the rest. We'll be waiting. The plaza erupted into shocked chaos. Warriors roared in fury. Citizens scattered in panic. But Emperor Valdrich simply stared at the containers, his mandibles clicking slowly, not in rage, but in calculation. The Galactic Empire convened an emergency war council within the hour. The Imperial High Command assembled in the war room, a massive chamber where the greatest military minds of the Empire had planned the conquest of dozens of worlds. For the first time in centuries, they faced a genuine dilemma. Every instinct, every cultural imperative, every ounce of Galactic's pride screamed for overwhelming retaliation. The insult was unprecedented. The audacity was staggering. Traditional Galactic's doctrine demanded they obliterate Earth immediately, glass the entire planet, make an example that would echo through the galaxy for millennia. But something gave them pause. Something made even the most aggressive commanders hesitate. These humans had infiltrated the most secure compound on Earth, a facility protected by the best Galactic's technology. They had eliminated 3 trained Galactic's warriors, each capable of killing dozens of humans in hand-to-hand combat without triggering a single alarm. They had extracted the bodies without detection. They had delivered those remains directly to the throne world itself, penetrating orbital defenses that had never been breached in 3,000 years of imperial rule. The operation demonstrated precision, planning, ruthlessness, and most disturbing of all, an intimate knowledge of Galactic's culture. The humans understood the language of dominance, and they had spoken it fluently, perfectly, in a dialect that even the Galactics themselves would have been proud of. Emperor Valdrich studied the intelligence reports on Earth with eyes that had seen the rise and fall of civilizations. His analysts had compiled everything: human history, military conflicts, cultural evolution, technological development. What he read both impressed and troubled him. Humans had been waging war against each other for their entire recorded history. Continuous, unbroken warfare spanning 10,000 years. They had survived ice ages that should have killed them. They had endured plagues that wiped out significant portions of their population and simply rebuilt. They had even survived nuclear weapons, actually used them against each other, and still continued thriving. Their military doctrine was built on asymmetric warfare, guerrilla tactics, and something the Galactics had never encountered in any other species: the absolute, unflinching willingness to die while taking their enemies with them. The humans had a saying, his analysts noted: "If I'm going down, I'm taking you with me." They meant it literally. "They're not prey," the Emperor finally said, his voice cutting through the War Council's deliberations. "These humans are not frightened animals to be hunted. They're rivals. Competitors. Equals." His first admiral, Ruthless, shifted uncomfortably. "Should we withdraw the ultimatum, Your Majesty? It appears we may have miscalculated." Valdrich's mandibles clicked in what passed for a Galactic's laugh, a sound like breaking stone. "Withdraw," he repeated, genuine amusement in his tone. "No, Admiral. But we will revise our approach significantly." He stood, his massive frame casting shadows across the war room's tactical displays. "Send a proper delegation. Not those pompous fools we sent before, actual military commanders. Warriors who understand respect. And this time," he emphasized, "we negotiate as equals, not as masters addressing slaves." "Equals, sire?" Ruthless questioned, confusion evident. "They're barely space-capable. They have 1 star system. We have 47. Valdrich turned to stare at his admiral, and his eyes held something that might have been respect. "They killed 3 of our finest warriors on their own territory and delivered a message directly to my doorstep, bypassing every defense we possess. That earns respect, Admiral. That earns serious consideration." He looked once more at the images of Earth, that blue planet covered in cities and weapons, teeming with billions of aggressive, unpredictable, creative, dangerous humans. "Besides," he added thoughtfully, "I would rather have these humans as allies than as enemies. Something tells me they would make exceptional soldiers for the Empire. Imagine their tactical creativity combined with our technology and resources." He smiled, a predator's smile. "Yes, I think we can work with these humans. But we approach them properly this time, with the honor warriors deserve." 3 weeks later, a massive Caldrex fleet arrived at Earth. But it wasn't an invasion force. It was a diplomatic armada, hundreds of ships arranged in ceremonial formation, their weapons powered down in a gesture of peaceful intent. At its center flew the Emperor's personal dreadnought, flanked by his honor guard. The Emperor himself had come. The meeting was arranged in neutral space, aboard a specifically constructed diplomatic station positioned between Earth and its moon. Every detail had been negotiated carefully: equal numbers of guards, neutral atmosphere, weapons permitted but holstered, mutual respect protocols. When Emperor Valdrich entered the conference chamber and saw President Morrison waiting, flanked by General Richards and Ambassador Thompson, all three wearing formal military dress uniforms, his first words caught her slightly off guard. "You speak our language well, humans. You understand the dialect of strength and honor." He inclined his head in a gesture that among the Caldrex indicated acknowledgement of worthy opponents. "Perhaps we began this conversation poorly. Let us start again, not as master and slave, but as warriors recognizing other warriors." Morrison smiled, but it was a cold smile, sharp as a blade. "We're listening, Emperor Valdrich. But understand this clearly, so there can be no misunderstanding in the future. Earth bows to no one. Not now. Not ever. Not to you. Not to any empire, regardless of size or power." She leaned forward slightly, her eyes locked with his. "You want to talk? We'll talk. You want to establish trade relations? We'll trade. You want cultural exchanges? We'll exchange. But if you want war..." She paused, letting the moment stretch. "Then bring everything you have. Bring your millions of ships. Bring your best warriors. Bring your full might. Because we will burn your empire to ash and scatter those ashes across the void before we surrender. This is not arrogance, Emperor. This is a promise." The Emperor's warriors tensed immediately, hands moving toward weapons, mandibles clicking with barely suppressed aggression at what could be interpreted as an insult to their leader. But Valdrich laughed, a genuine, booming sound that echoed through the chamber and shocked everyone present. "Yes," he exclaimed, genuine delight in his voice. "Yes, you'll do nicely. Perfectly, in fact." He extended his arm in the Caldrex gesture of alliance, a significant honor rarely offered. "Welcome to the galactic community, humans. I suspect things are about to become very interesting indeed. The old powers have grown complacent. Perhaps they need to remember what it means to face true predators." As the negotiations began in earnest, discussions of mutual defense pacts, technology exchanges, trade agreements, and cultural understanding, Ambassador Thompson stood by the observation window, watching Earth rotate slowly below. He allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. Earth had rolled the dice and won. They'd gambled everything on a single, brutal message: that the Caldrex would respect overwhelming strength over desperate submission, that they would understand the language of warriors better than the language of victims. And they'd been right. Humanity had announced its arrival on the galactic stage not with words or pleas or careful diplomacy, but with action. With clarity. With absolute certainty about who and what they were. The galaxy would never underestimate them again. And somewhere in the back of Thompson's mind, he wondered what other empires had heard about Earth's response to the Caldrex ultimatum. He wondered what messages were being whispered through the galactic networks. What stories were being told in alien councils. He suspected that message had been received loud and clear across dozens of star systems. Humanity had entered the cosmic stage. And they had done so on their own terms. The Age of Earth had begun. 6 months later. The treaty negotiations had taken 3 months of intensive work. Every clause had been debated, every word scrutinized, every implication examined from every possible angle. The resulting document, the Earth-Caldrex Mutual Defense and Cooperation Treaty, represented something unprecedented in galactic history. For the first time, the Caldrex Empire had signed an agreement with another species as equals. Ambassador Thompson sat in his new office aboard the joint Earth-Caldrex diplomatic station that now orbited Earth's moon. Through the viewport, he could see both his home planet and a Caldrex heavy cruiser maintaining a respectful distance. 6 months ago, that sight would have triggered immediate panic. Now it was routine. His assistant, Lieutenant Sarah Chen, entered with yet another stack of data tablets. "Sir, we've received responses from 17 additional species regarding the treaty," she reported, setting the tablets on his desk. "Most are concerned." Thompson raised an eyebrow. "Concerned? That's diplomatic speak for terrified. What are they actually saying?" Chen pulled up the first message. "The Valorian Confederation wants to know if the alliance is defensive or offensive in nature. The Thraxian Republic is requesting clarification on whether Earth plans to export its aggressive diplomatic methodology to other regions. And the Zinthari Collective has filed a formal protest with the Galactic Council, claiming the alliance represents a threat to established galactic order." Thompson leaned back in his chair, a slight smile playing across his lips. In other words, everyone who's been comfortable with the status quo is suddenly worried that the rules have changed. "That would be an accurate assessment, sir," Chen agreed. "There's also been a significant increase in diplomatic overtures. 12 species have requested formal meetings to discuss mutual interests. The Borellian Trade Consortium wants to establish trade relations, and the Keltharian Star Kingdom has sent what amounts to a friendship bracelet." Thompson laughed despite himself. "A what?" "It's actually a neural interface device that allows limited telepathic communication. In their culture, it's a gesture of profound trust and," Chen paused, checking her notes, "a recognition of kindred warrior spirits." "File that under things I never expected to receive," Thompson muttered. "What about the other major powers? The Viridian Alliance? The Confluence?" Chen's expression grew more serious. "That's where it gets interesting, sir. The Viridian Alliance has been very quiet. Too quiet. Our intelligence suggests they're convening emergency sessions to reassess their entire diplomatic strategy regarding human-controlled space. As for the Confluence..." She hesitated. "Just tell me, Lieutenant." "They've placed formal observers in 17 star systems surrounding human space. They're watching us very carefully, sir. And according to intercepted communications, they're specifically analyzing what they're calling the Earth methodology for potential replication." Thompson absorbed this information thoughtfully. Earth's brutal response to the Caldrex ultimatum had sent shockwaves through the galactic community far beyond what anyone had anticipated. Other species weren't just watching humanity, they were studying them, trying to understand how a single-system civilization had not only survived but thrived after confronting a major empire. "Schedule the meetings," he decided. "All of them. We might as well capitalize on the attention while we have it. And get me a direct line to President Morrison. She'll want to know about the Confluence observers." As Chen left to make the arrangements, Thompson turned back to the viewport. A Caldrex shuttle was approaching the station, probably another delegation arriving for the military technology exchange program that had been initiated last month. The program had been General Richard's idea. In exchange for access to certain Caldrex weapon systems and faster-than-light communication technology, Earth had offered something the Caldrex had never encountered: human tactical training methodologies. The results had been remarkable. The Caldrex commanders, who had spent centuries perfecting direct assault tactics based on overwhelming force, were now learning about guerrilla warfare, psychological operations, strategic deception, and what humans called asymmetric response strategies. In turn, human officers were gaining access to technology and strategic thinking developed across 47 star systems. Both sides were benefiting enormously, and both sides were becoming considerably more dangerous. Thompson's communicator chimed. He glanced at the ID. It was Ruthless, the Caldrex first admiral who had initially questioned treating humans as equals. "Admiral," Thompson greeted him. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" The alien's image appeared in holographic form above the desk. His mandibles were clicking slowly, a sign Thompson had learned indicated amusement. "Ambassador Thompson, I'm calling to inform you that the Emperor wishes to invite President Morrison to Caldros Prime for the Festival of Ascension. It's our highest honor, reserved for recognized warrior leaders. No human has ever been invited before. In fact," Ruthless added, "no non-Caldrex has been invited in over 500 years." Thompson felt a surge of pride mixed with wariness. This was a tremendous honor, but also a test. Everything with the Caldrex was a test. The president will be honored, Admiral. When is the festival? 3 months from now. It lasts for one full rotation of Caldros Prime, approximately 37 of your hours. There will be ceremonies, combat demonstrations, strategic simulations, and the rite of blood bonding. Thompson's diplomatic instincts immediately went on alert. Rite of blood bonding? A ceremonial combat ritual where leaders fight alongside each other against controlled opponents. It symbolizes trust and mutual respect. Your president would be partnered with Emperor Valdrich himself. Krethus paused. I should mention that the combat is real, Ambassador. The opponents are automated but highly lethal. Participants have died. Of course they have, Thompson thought. Because nothing with the Caldrex was ever simple or safe. I'll convey the invitation to President Morrison, he said diplomatically. I'm certain she'll give it the serious consideration it deserves. After the call ended, Thompson immediately contacted Earth. President Morrison listened to the explanation of the invitation while seated in the Oval Office, General Richards and Dr. Foster flanking her. So let me make sure I understand this correctly, Morrison said when Thompson finished. They want me to travel to their home world and participate in a ritual combat ceremony where I could actually die, alongside an alien emperor, to prove that Earth and the Galactic Empire respect each other as warrior cultures. That's an accurate summary, Madam President, Thompson confirmed via the secure quantum link. Richards was already shaking his head. Absolutely not. The security risks alone are. I'm going, Morrison interrupted. Both Richards and Foster stared at her. Madam President, Foster began carefully. While I appreciate the diplomatic significance, the general is right. You'd be alone on an alien world, surrounded by a species that was threatening to exterminate us 6 months ago, participating in actual combat. Which is exactly why I have to go, Morrison said firmly. Think about it. We gambled everything on the premise that the Caldrex respect strength and direct action over political maneuvering. That gamble paid off. But if I decline this invitation, if I hide behind security concerns and diplomatic protocols, we lose everything we've gained. She stood, pacing to the window, overlooking the White House gardens. The Caldrex are testing us again. Testing me specifically. They want to know if Earth's leadership has the same courage as our soldiers, the same conviction as our response demonstrated. If I refuse, they'll see it as weakness. And weakness, in their culture, invalidates everything. Richards understood the logic, but hated it. Then, at least let me send a full security detail. Special forces, the best we have. No, Morrison said. That would also be seen as weakness, as a lack of confidence in their honor. I'll go with a minimal diplomatic escort, as their protocols require, and nothing more. Foster looked like he might be sick. You do understand that if something goes wrong, if you die on Caldros Prime, it could trigger a war? The vice president would be under enormous pressure to respond militarily. Then brief her thoroughly, Morrison replied. Make sure she understands that if I die during the ceremony, it's not an assassination, it's a cultural ritual gone wrong. The appropriate response would be to continue the alliance, not end it. She returned to her desk, her decision made and unshakable. Gentlemen, 6 months ago I ordered the execution of 3 alien ambassadors and had their heads delivered to an emperor's doorstep. I gambled with the fate of our entire species. Compared to that, participating in a combat ritual seems almost reasonable. Thompson's voice came through the communicator, tinged with what might have been admiration or might have been concern. Madam President, there's one more thing you should know. The Caldrex have announced publicly that you've been invited. It's already galactic news. Every major species knows. If you decline now, it won't just damage our relationship with the Caldrex, it'll signal to the entire galaxy that humanity's courage has limits. Morrison smiled grimly. Of course they announced it publicly. Why make it easy? Confirm my acceptance, Ambassador. Tell Emperor Valdrich I look forward to the Festival of Ascension. After disconnecting, Richard slumped in his chair. I'm going to have nightmares about this for months. "Join the club, General," Foster muttered. "I'm already drafting contingency plans for approximately 73 different disaster scenarios." Morrison, however, felt oddly calm. In the past 6 months, she'd learned something profound about leadership in the galactic community. Boldness mattered more than caution. Appearance mattered more than reality. And sometimes, the most dangerous path was also the only viable one. Earth hadn't become a player on the galactic stage by being careful. They'd done it by being audacious. She intended to keep that momentum going. 3 months later, Caldros Prime. The Imperial Plaza of Caldros Prime was unlike anything President Morrison had ever experienced. The architecture was massive, angular, built from materials that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Tens of thousands of Caldrecs filled the ceremonial grounds, their chittering and mandible clicking creating a sound like thousands of stones being struck together. Morrison stood beside Emperor Valdrich in what the Caldrecs called combat dress, minimal armor, maximum mobility. The armor had been custom-made for her biology, and while it felt strange, she had to admit the craftsmanship was extraordinary. "Are you prepared, President Morrison?" Valdrich asked, his translator rendering his question in perfect English. "As prepared as one can be for ritual combat with an alien emperor against killer robots," she replied dryly. Valdrich's mandibles clicked, laughter. "Your species has a gift for humor in the face of danger. We Caldrecs appreciate this quality." The arena before them was enormous, easily 200 meters across, with walls that rose 30 meters high. The crowd surrounded them on all sides, tier upon tier of Caldrecs warriors, nobles, and citizens come to witness their emperor bond with an alien leader. A Caldrecs priest, or what Morrison understood to be their equivalent, stepped forward and began speaking in the ancient tongue of their people. Morrison's translator rendered it. "We gather to witness the rite of blood bonding. 2 leaders, 2 warriors, 2 peoples united in respect and strength. Let the trial begin." Immediately, sections of the arena floor opened. Morrison's combat training kicked in as she assessed the threats emerging from below. The automated opponents were approximately 3 meters tall, heavily armed, and moved with disturbing speed and coordination. There were 6 of them, 3 approaching her and Valdrich, 3 circling to flank. "Standard hunting pack formation," Valdrich observed calmly. "They'll try to separate us. Don't let them." Morrison drew the weapon she'd been provided, a plasma blade that hummed with barely contained energy. "I've fought alongside soldiers in worse situations. Let's give them a show." What followed was brutal, exhausting, and unlike anything the Caldrecs had expected. Morrison fought with a combination of technique and improvisation that confused the automated opponent's tactical algorithms. She dodged when they expected her to block, attacked when they expected retreat, and used the environment in ways their programming hadn't anticipated. At one point, she actually used one opponent's own momentum to throw it into another, buying herself precious seconds. Valdrich fought with overwhelming power and precision, his natural strength and combat experience allowing him to dismantle opponents with almost casual efficiency. But he also coordinated seamlessly with Morrison, covering her vulnerable moments, creating openings she could exploit. 15 minutes later, all 6 opponents lay deactivated on the arena floor. Morrison and Valdrich stood back to back, both breathing heavily, both wounded but victorious. The crowd erupted. The sound was deafening, thousands of Caldrecs warriors striking their armor in approval, creating a thunderous rhythm that shook the arena floor. The priest stepped forward again. "The rite is complete. Blood has been shared. Honor has been proven. The bond is sealed." Valdrich turned to Morrison, and in full view of his people, he performed a gesture she'd been briefed meant absolute respect between equals. He lowered his head and exposed his throat, the most vulnerable part of a Caldrecs warrior's anatomy. Morrison understood the significance immediately. She placed her hand over his throat briefly, accepting the gesture, then mimicked it, lowering her own head in return. The crowd's approval somehow grew even louder. Later, in the Imperial receiving room, cleaned and bandaged, Morrison sat with Valdrich sharing what the Caldrecs considered a ceremonial drink, something that tasted vaguely like bourbon mixed with battery acid. You surprised them, Valdrich said, gesturing toward the plaza where the ceremony had occurred. My people expected you to rely on me for protection. Instead, you fought as an equal. Several of my commanders have already requested permission to study human combat methodologies more intensively. Morrison smiled despite her exhaustion. I'm just glad I survived. There were several moments where I wasn't certain I would. That uncertainty, Valdrich replied, is what makes the right meaningful. If there's no risk, there's no honor. He paused, his expression, as much as she could read of an alien face, becoming more serious. You've changed things, President Morrison. Not just between our peoples, but across the galaxy. Other species are watching what we've built together. Some with hope, others with fear. And some, Morrison added, with jealousy. Indeed. Valdrich leaned forward. Which is why I must warn you. The Viridian Alliance has been making inquiries. Subtle ones, but inquiries nonetheless. They want to know if our alliance has military implications. If Earth would honor a mutual defense pact against external threats. Morrison considered this carefully. What do you think they're really asking? They're asking if humanity would fight alongside us if the Viridians decided to test our borders. They've been the dominant military power in this region for centuries. Our alliance threatens that dominance. Would the Viridians actually attack Kaldrek's territory? Valdrich's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. 6 months ago, I would have said no. We're too powerful, too entrenched. But now, with human tactical thinking integrated into our military doctrine, with our combined technology sharing, with the psychological impact of what you did. He trailed off. Morrison finished the thought. We've become strong enough to be threatening. Strong enough that the Viridians might feel they need to act before we become too powerful. Precisely. Morrison stared into her drink, watching the strange liquid swirl. Earth had wanted a place at the galactic table. They'd fought for respect, for recognition, for the right to be taken seriously. Congratulations, she thought wryly. You got what you wanted. Now you're important enough to be involved in alien politics and potentially alien wars. Tell me about the Viridians, she said. Everything. Their culture, their military capabilities, their diplomatic history. If we're going to navigate this, we need to understand all the players. Valdrich smiled, a predator's smile. Now you think like a galactic power, President Morrison. This is why our alliance will endure. You understand that strength alone is not enough. Intelligence, strategy, understanding, these matter equally. As they talked late into the Caldra's prime night, Morrison couldn't help but reflect on how much had changed in 6 months. Earth had gone from an isolated world facing extermination to a recognized power with alliances, enemies, and a role in shaping galactic politics. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. And somewhere in the back of her mind, she wondered what the next challenge would be. Because if there was one thing she'd learned about the galaxy, it was this. There was always another challenge. The age of Earth had truly begun. And with it came all the opportunities and dangers that being a galactic power entailed. Ambassador Thompson had been right to smile 6 months ago. Humanity had announced itself boldly, dramatically, unforgettably. Now, they had to live up to that announcement. And President Jennifer Morrison, sitting in an alien palace on a world light years from home, bleeding from ritual combat wounds and planning for potential wars against species she'd only just learned existed, was determined to do exactly that. Earth would not just survive in the galactic community. Earth would thrive. Epilogue. The message that changed everything. 3 weeks after Morrison's return from Caldra's Prime, Ambassador Thompson received a message that would alter the trajectory of human galactic involvement forever. It came through encrypted channels from an unknown source, transmitted via quantum relay through 17 different star systems to obscure its origin. The message was brief, written in flawless English, and deeply disturbing. The Viridian Alliance plans to test Earth's resolve within 60 days. They will stage an incident in the Caltharian border region and observe your response. How you react will determine whether they view you as a legitimate power or a temporary anomaly to be corrected. This is not a threat. This is a warning from someone who has seen this pattern before. Prepare accordingly. A friend you haven't met yet. Thompson immediately forwarded the message to Earth, flagging it as Priority Alpha. Within hours, President Morrison convened an emergency session with her entire Security Council. General Richards was already pulling up strategic maps of the Caltharian region. Dr. Foster was compiling everything known about Viridian diplomatic tactics. And Ambassador Thompson, participating via quantum link from his orbital station, was coordinating with Caldrec's intelligence to verify the warning's authenticity. Opinions? Morrison asked, her fingers drumming on the conference table, a habit she developed when processing complex threats. It could be disinformation, Foster suggested carefully. Designed to make us paranoid, to strain our relationship with the Viridians before any actual conflict occurs. Or, Richards countered, it could be exactly what it claims to be, a warning from an unknown party who benefits from Earth remaining strong. He highlighted several star systems on the display. If the Viridians are planning something, this region makes tactical sense. It's far enough from their core systems to maintain plausible deniability, but close enough to our sphere of influence to send a message. Morrison turned to Thompson's holographic image. Ambassador, what does your gut tell you? Thompson was quiet for a moment, considering. 6 months ago, he would have dismissed this as paranoid speculation. But 6 months ago, he hadn't witnessed what he'd witnessed since. Hadn't seen the careful calculations of galactic powers, the endless testing and probing, the way every action carried implications that rippled across dozens of star systems. I think, he said slowly, that we've kicked over an anthill, Madam President. We've disrupted the established order. And established orders don't simply accept disruption. They test it, probe it, and, if necessary, correct it. Morrison nodded, her decision crystallizing. Then we prepare. Not just for one incident, but for an extended period of testing. If this galaxy wants to see what Earth is made of, we'll show them. She stood, her expression hardening into the same determination that had carried her through every crisis of the past 6 months. And we'll make damn sure they never forget the lesson. Outside the Oval Office windows, the sun was setting over Washington, D.C. But somewhere above, in the vast darkness of space, the real challenges were just beginning. Humanity had announced itself to the galaxy. Now came the hard part, proving they deserved to stay.